You've probably heard the phrase, history repeats itself, but that's a comforting lie. The truth is far more cynical and far more revealing. History doesn't repeat, it *rhymes star. And in the echoes of our greatest catastrophes, you can hear the same few notes, the same human failures played over and over again on a grand, symphonic scale of suffering. We are going to map them. We are going to look at the moments where a single, critical mistake became a blueprint for annihilation, a template of error that was then, with horrifying fidelity, copied and pasted onto fresh tragedy. This isn't about assigning blame to the ghosts of the past. This is about recognizing the blueprint so we can tear it up before it's used again. Listen closely, this is death's blueprint. Let's start with a concept so fundamental it underpins almost every disaster. The normalization of deviance. You don't just wake up one day and decide to fly a spacecraft with known faulty O-rings into a freezing Florida sky. No, that path is paved with 1,000 tiny, acceptable compromises. The Space Shuttle Challenger disaster on January 28, 1986, is the textbook case. The mistake wasn't the failure of the rubber O-ring seal on the solid rocket booster. It was the years of engineering meetings where that same O-ring showed signs of distress, erosion, soot blowby on previous flights. And each time, it was logged, analyzed, and then accepted. The deviation from perfect performance became normal. It became data, not a death sentence. The engineers at Morton Thiokol knew the O-rings lost resilience in cold weather. They argued, passionately, the night before the launch. But the organizational machinery, conditioned by past successes where the deviation asterisk had an asterisk led to catastrophe, overruled them. The launch decision was a single, terrible mistake. But it was the final step on a long staircase built from normalized deviance. The survival logic here is brutal. A system that stops treating near misses as emergencies is a system already in its failure sequence. You must cultivate a paranoia for the small symptom, because the small symptom is the only warning you'll ever get. This section is based on practical, field survival experience rather than formal academic sources. If the first flaw is complacency, the second is its evil twin, hierarchical silence. Now, picture the cockpit of Korean Air Flight 801, descending through a torrential rainstorm towards Guam on August 6, 1997. The captain is a veteran, a revered figure. His first officer and flight engineer are junior. They are aware, with growing dread, that the captain has misidentified a critical navigational beacon and is descending too fast, too early, into a mountain ridge. But the cultural hierarchy in that cockpit is a wall. The junior officers don't speak with direct, forceful clarity. They hint. They use mitigated speech. Sir, the weather radar has helped us a lot. They do not say, you are wrong. Pull up now. The black box recorder captures this dance of deference all the way to impact. This mistake, the failure of communication, under pressure, is etched into the blueprint of countless disasters. From aviation to the operating room to the nuclear reactor control room. The survival insight is counterintuitive. In a true crisis, formal rank must dissolve into a pure flow of information. You must train not just to hear, but to listen for uncertainty in your team's voice. And you must have a protocol, a sacred keyword, that instantly equalizes authority and shouts down the hierarchy when the cliff edge is invisible to the captain, but clear to the crew. Which brings us to the third critical mistake, the single point of failure. We are obsessed with the elegant, the simple, the streamlined system. But elegance in complex systems is often just fragility in disguise. Consider the interconnected grid of the North American Power Network on August 14, 2003. A software bug in an alarm system in an Ohio control room went unnoticed. A few transmission lines, sagging in the heat, brushed against untrimmed trees and shut down. This should have been a local, manageable event. But the grid, for all its vastness, had critical, unprotected bottlenecks. The failure cascaded. One tripped line overloaded the next, and the next, in a wave of electrons seeking a path that no longer existed. Within minutes, 55 million people were plunged into a pre-industrial age. The mistake was believing that robustness came from size alone, not from redundancy, segmentation, and graceful degradation. The survival principle here is network theory. You need circuit breakers, both literal and metaphorical. You need to build compartments so that a fire in one room doesn't asphyxiate the entire building. In your own life, this is your backup water filter when the municipal system fails, your cache when the digital grid vanishes. Never let your survival depend on a component that cannot fail, because every component can and will. We now step from systemic failure into the realm of deliberate, calculated gambling. Mistake number 4, profit calculus overriding physics. The sinking of the RMS Titanic is often framed as a tragedy of hubris, an unsinkable ship meeting an iceberg. But the real mistake was more venal, more human. The ship was carrying 2,224 people, but its lifeboat capacity was for 1,178. This wasn't an oversight. It was a design decision. The Board of Trade Regulations, outdated as they were, based lifeboat requirements on gross tonnage, not passenger count. The White Star Line followed the letter of the law, not the spirit of survival. More lifeboats meant less deck space for first-class promenades. More cost, more clutter. The risk of a catastrophic event requiring the simultaneous evacuation of everyone on board was deemed acceptably remote. The profit and comfort calculus said, minimal lifeboats. The physics of a 46,000-ton ship hitting ice at 22 knots said otherwise. This is the blueprint of the preventable mass casualty event, when the abstract statistics of risk assessment drown out the concrete reality of individual human lives. The survival takeaway is to always interrogate the incentives behind your safety systems. Who benefits from the cheaper part, the thinner material, the skipped procedure? If the answer is a balance sheet, you are not in a safety system. You are in a betting pool. This section is based on practical field survival experience rather than formal academic sources. Mistake 5 is a psychological trap, procedural blindness. You follow the manual to the letter, and it kills you because the manual was written for a different world. The Man Gulch Fire of August 5, 1949, is a devastating example. A crew of 15 elite smoke jumpers parachuted into Montana to fight what seemed a routine wildfire, when the fire suddenly exploded, racing up a canyon wall at incredible speed. Their foreman, Wagner Dodge, did something insane. He stopped running. He lit a match and set fire to the grass directly in front of him, then stepped into the burnt, barren patch as the main fire roared around him. He invented the escape fire on the spot. 2 of his crew followed him and lived. The other 13, adhering to their training which said to outrun the fire, or to retreat to a previously burnt area, which didn't exist, perished. Their mistake was the inability to abandon, a failing procedure when reality itself had changed the rules. They were slaves to a plan that the fire had already torn up. Survival, especially in a novel crisis, requires situational awareness so acute it borders on precognition. You must be able to see the moment when the map no longer matches the territory, and have the courage, or the desperation, to throw the map away and start drawing a new one from scratch. Number 6 is the failure of imagination, the inability to conceive of a threat so outside baseline experience that it is dismissed as fantasy. The 1986 Chernobyl disaster is a cathedral to this era. The test that was being run on reactor number 4 was meant to see if the turbines, during a coast down, could provide enough power to run safety systems. To do this, they had to disable automatic safety controls and push the reactor into an unstable, low-power state. Senior engineers were present. They had a procedural checklist. What they did not have was a mental model for what a reactor core could do if it went prompt critical. They were electrical engineers thinking in terms of circuits and switches, not physicists visualizing a runaway nuclear fission chain reaction. When the reactor began to surge wildly, the operator pressed the emergency shutdown button, AZ5. This inserted all control rods, but the rods had a fatal design flaw. Their graphite tips actually increased reactivity for a few seconds as they entered. This was the final, unimagined spark. The mistake was conducting a dangerous experiment on a system, whose extreme potential they could not, or would not, visualize. The survival insight is that you must force yourself to imagine the worst-case scenario, not as a vague fear, but as a concrete sequence of events. What is the graphite tip in your system? What does the unthinkable chain reaction look like? If you can't picture it, you are defenseless against it. We then encounter mistake 7, the toxic cocktail of secrecy and political posturing. Disasters don't happen in a vacuum. They happen in societies. The Great Chinese Famine from 1959 to 1961, during which tens of millions perished, was not simply a result of bad weather. It was catastrophically engineered by policy. The Great Leap Forward mandated impossible grain production quotas. Local officials, terrified of being seen as disloyal or counter-revolutionary, systematically falsified harvest reports upward. They reported bumper crops that did not exist. Based on these lies, the central government requisitioned crippling amounts of grain from starving villages to feed cities and for export. Peasants were left with nothing. To question the data was to question the revolution itself. The mistake was building a system where the truth was politically inexpedient, and where the messenger risked destruction. The survival mechanism of any organism, from a body to a body politic, is accurate feedback. Pain tells you you're touching fire. Hunger tells you you need food. When a system is severed from truthful feedback, when pain is punished, instead of heeded, the organism will consume itself. The lesson is to cherish your dissenting voices, your canaries in the coal mine. If you silence them, you are simply turning out the lights while the gas continues to fill the room. Mistake 8 is the slow-moving disaster, the one that lacks a spectacular, cinematic moment of collapse, and therefore earns our indifference. The ongoing crisis of antibiotic-resistant bacteria is a planetary-scale example. The mistake was, and is, the profound abuse of one of medicine's greatest miracles. We used antibiotics as growth promoters in livestock. We prescribed them for viral infections where they are useless. Patients stopped taking them as soon as they felt better, allowing the hardiest bacteria to survive and multiply. We did this knowingly for decades, because the disaster was incremental. There was no antibiotic Pearl Harbor. Just a slow, steady erosion of our defensive wall, brick by brick. Until now we have pathogens like carbapenem-resistant, Enterobacteria C, ghastly, superbugs, that can withstand virtually everything we throw at them. The error is a failure of temporal imagination. We are brilliant at reacting to the sudden impact. We are terrible at defending against the creeping tide. Survival demands a reverence for slow, compounding threats. It requires acting with urgency against a danger whose worst effects are always one generation, one prescription, one harvest away. This section is based on practical field survival experience rather than formal academic sources. Number 9 is perhaps the most intimate, the paralysis of consensus. When disaster strikes, we naturally seek collaboration. But there is a dark edge to this, where the desire for group agreement overrides decisive action. The tragedy of Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571, the 1972 Andes crash that spawned the Alive narrative, offers a stark contrast. After the crash, faced with freezing temperatures, injuries, and no hope of imminent rescue, the initial group dynamics were chaotic, but survival demanded brutal, unanimous decisions that defied all civilized norms. They agreed to use the dead as food. Later, they agreed to send the fittest on a suicidal trek over the mountains for help. These were not decisions made by committee. They were dire covenants entered into by everyone, because partial commitment meant certain death for all. The mistake, seen in other less extreme scenarios, is to debate until the window for action closes. The survival logic is that in a true existential crisis, a flawed decision executed with total commitment is better than a perfect plan, debated until you starve. You must have a mechanism to break consensus, a designated decider, a lottery, a vote, when time is the ultimate enemy. Finally, mistake 10, the worship of the tool and the forgetting of the fundamental. We fall in love with our technology, our complexity, our interconnected genius, and in doing so, we become blind to the basic. physical realities that underpin our existence. The fall of the Roman Empire wasn't an event. It was a process where the complex systems of tax collection, long-distance grain supply, and frontier defense eventually grew too brittle. But at its core, the empire degraded its fundamental resource, its agricultural land. Deforestation led to erosion. Salinization ruined fields. The literal foundation of its power, the soil, was spent. Fast forward to a modern analog, a major coastal city during a prolonged blackout. The tool worship is our belief in the eternal tap water, the refrigerated grocery supply, the digital currency, the GPS. When those tools vanish, survival reverts to fundamentals: hydraulic pressure, calorie density, bacterial contamination, solar navigation. The ultimate mistake is to let your knowledge of the world become a layer of abstraction, so thick you forget the laws of thermodynamics, hydrology, and human physiology that it rests upon. Your final defense is not your smartest device, but your understanding of the most basic principles: how to find water, how to purify it, how to stay warm, how to signal for help. So there you have it. Death's blueprint. 10 critical mistakes. Normalization of deviance. Hierarchical silence. Single points of failure. Profit over physics. Procedural blindness. Failure of imagination. Secrecy silencing feedback. Indifference to slow threats. Consensus paralysis. And forgetting the fundamentals. They are rarely solitary. They combine. They intertwine. They build upon one another to turn a manageable incident into a historic catastrophe. This map isn't meant to be a monument to despair. It's a diagnostic tool. Look at any system you rely on, your government, your infrastructure, your own household emergency plan, and scan for these flaws. Are you normalizing small warnings? Are their voices being politely ignored? Is there a single bolt that, if it sheared, would collapse the entire structure? Recognizing the blueprint is the first and most vital step in tearing it up, because the ghosts in these stories aren't haunting us. They're trying to pass us a note. It's scribbled in the cold ash of a burned forest, in the silent pressure of a deep ocean, in the static of a lost radio frequency. And it says the same thing every time. Asterisk, this was not an accident. This was a choice. Learn the pattern, or become part of it. Asterisk.